I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. Today, I am so excited to interview one of my Instagram friends, Jill Shemileski. Jill is a registered nurse in the United States. I found Jill on Instagram. I don't even know how long ago it was now, Jill, like at least over a year ago for sure, because of her great content on menopause and the perimenopausal experience. So welcome to the podcast, Jill.
Oh, Jordan, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And as we talked about, we've been like Instagram friends for so long. It feels like we know each other.
I know, it does. I'm excited for us to have this conversation because I think you and I approach this sort of subject with perimenopause and menopause really similarly. We have this same sort of empowerment message for women. I think we're both on a mission to support women in this stage of their life. And so I wanted us to have a pretty good conversation about what women can do for themselves during this stage, how to recognize the challenges and symptoms that they're having in themselves, and then to talk a little bit about some of the options and where the myths are, because there's still, like, I can't even believe I'm using the word myth in 2021 to talk about medicine, but here we are. But before we dive into that, I'd love if you could kind of give us your backstory and how you got to this place in supporting women with their hormones.
Yeah, thanks. So I worked in women's health for a long time as a registered nurse. And I ultimately ended up sort of shifting about 10 years ago into this integrative world because I really felt like conventional medicine, has there's lots of great things about conventional medicine, but it was missing this huge piece that really looks at the whole body and kind of head to toe and mental health, physical health, the whole thing. And so I started kind of going down this path and I became a health coach. I went through health coach training. I went through functional medicine training and I started working with patients. And I think for whatever reason, probably because I'm in that perimenopausal stage, I started to really draw in patients who were in the same stage of life as me and found this sort of love for working with these women because I feel like their symptoms and all that their experience is just dismissed so often by their doctors and by other people. And so I think that, I just found that these people are the people that really need the support. And I love working with them, educating them, helping them understand their bodies so that they can help to create a really awesome health strategy for their future.
And I think that I hear such common phrases in there that what you said, right? That when women approach their practitioner about their symptoms, and we've struggled with this in the research around menopause too, because what's happening to women between 45 and 55 is, well, I like to call it puberty version 2.0, but maybe worse,
Yes.
right? And version 1.0. But they're also aging, right? And so we create this like a bit of a misunderstanding about what's happening to women because, they start chalking it up to age, or women will say, well, I'm getting older, or maybe this is what I should expect because I'm getting older. Is that what you hear?
That is exactly what I hear. I mean, it's this sort of idea that, if you kind of stand back and you say, okay, in your 40s, this is sort of that time where we really see women start to struggle. Sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later. Some women will tell you there isn't a struggle that they've had, which is very, very unique. I don't find that very often, but I feel like it's in the 40s, and you kind of take a step back and think, okay, you've been on the planet for a long time. You are typically a woman who's probably working. You're probably maybe raising a family, maybe taking care of aging parents. You're in this kind of sandwich generation anyway. So you've got all this stress to boot. Your body is going through, like you said, puberty 2.0. So where hormones are really on the up and up in puberty, they're starting to make their downward decline in perimenopause. And I don't think that's something that women really understand. They think of menopause as just this pinnacle, this point where all of a sudden one day I won't have a period. But there's a whole period of time leading up to it, which can start in the 30s for some women. So it really depends. But they go to their doctor oftentimes and they're just told that, well, yeah, you're getting older, or you're busy, or life is stressful, or this is modern day living, when really there's all of this stuff happening kind of behind the scenes in their body that if they could, stop and sort of pay attention to and start to prioritize, and maybe, take some action steps surrounding that, they might start to feel better. But I think they're sort of just put off as just, yep, this is part of aging and this is what you should expect.
Yeah, it's like we blame everything on their circumstances,
Yeah.
right? That like,
Hmm.
well, of course you are depressed and crying all the time. You have kids in university and your mom is aging and da 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 da. Versus, right? And that same woman, maybe 10 years earlier, would have been able to navigate some of those challenges, right? But now she feels less resilient, right? The same issues are not producing the same strong woman, right? That
Yeah.
used to be able to rise up and actually deal with all those things. And I think that's what creates that big identity crisis for women, right? Like in theory, they should feel like they're at the peak of their life.
Hmm.
And maybe they are, right? But they don't feel that way, right? They don't feel like that confident version of themselves that worked so hard to get there.
Hmm. And they're embarrassed. I feel like a lot of women, we're really good about telling our pregnancy stories. We love sharing the birth story. But when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, no one wants to talk about, I sneezed and I peed, or I'm getting a lot more urinary tract infections, or I'm not sleeping at night, or I'm, soaking through the sheets, or I have no libido, or, all of the things that I have brain fog. I mean, that's a big one. I'm starting to forget things, or I don't feel like my vibrant self. I think there's a lot of embarrassment around this stage because we feel like we should be able to handle it. Like you said, in your 30s, you're like, I've got this. In your 20s, you've got this. But in the 40s, most of us don't realize that our hormones play this huge role in not just our periods and babies and all the things, but in the way that we feel and our oomph every day. And we kind of almost blame ourselves as like, well, it must be me. It's something that I'm lacking or I'm not doing right. When it's really this hormonal cascade of events that's happening in our body and other things as well, because the body's so interconnected. But I think they are embarrassed oftentimes. No one wants to say it. And I don't know that a lot of mainstream practitioners, a lot of PCPs have the time to ask their patients about this, or really know what to say, or even want to ask their patients about this, how they're feeling about midlife. Medicine's not set up that way, to really spend time with patients to understand them and see what understand their struggles. It's sort of that annual quick, let's just check these boxes and get on with it, where there's a lot more opportunity to really, if there was some time, there'd be some opportunity to investigate this a little bit more.
You're, I, it's interesting. I've had this conversation on the podcast before when someone mentioned, well, women don't see themselves represented in the media at this age, right? Women in their 40s and 50s are like, they're washed up, right? Or they feel washed up. And I didn't see or feel that until I had that conversation on the podcast in one episode. And then since then, I hear it in my patients, right? That I hear them saying, clothes were not made for me. There's no, like, aside from maybe getting the odd anti-aging cream targeted ad, they don't feel like they see themselves in other women, right? And so it
Yeah.
creates this isolation, and where they don't have the role model to look up to. They don't see themselves
Mhm.
reflected in the images that they see online. And then it starts to create this idea that they're this washed up version of their old self. Then we throw hormone changes on top of that, right? That leave them feeling unconfident and depressed. And so we basically are getting this like perfect storm of women not feeling very well, but also feeling really isolated, which is the recipe for them not to seek the kind of support. And I think that word embarrassment is really important.
Yeah, and you know what? That's such an interesting point to say isolated, because I think if I were when I work with patients and clients and ask them about how they're feeling, the like most of them are able to articulate, I just feel so isolated. I feel so alone. And even if they have friends, and I think right now, particularly with the pandemic and being in the state that we're in, I mean, I think a lot of us are concerned about our kids right now, but people in this age range, women who are, used to really connecting with friends and being around other people and feeling like there's some connection, talk about feeling even more isolated. It really is it just sort of adds more, I think, loneliness to their experience to be in this phase. And also, like I think you and I were talking about before the show, there's this sort of thought that this kind of like chapter 2 of their life, and they should be feeling it's the next chapter. What am I going to do? And they feel even more isolated because they've maybe raised kids, and now they really don't know where they belong in the world. So there's just it's such an interesting time of life, and one that I think you can talk to people and you can try to even educate people before it comes, but it's almost like until you experience it, you cannot even fathom what this is going to feel like. I feel like I've worked with a lot of patients that are starting to feel certain things, and they're like, gosh, all of a sudden it would like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was feeling great and then I wasn't. And I think sometimes that's what often happens, where there's this, it's never going to happen to me, or it's those women, but it does. I think for all women at some point they're going to feel some version of this.
Hmm. And kind of to your point earlier, like when we focus so much about hormones being about babies, right? That we miss this idea that hormones actually influence us, like you said, from head to toe. And so women, I think, don't know the symptoms to look for when to acknowledge that they're having hormonal symptoms. And it's only when they've been dismissed like 50 times do they go, this must be my hormones, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we find practitioners like you and I who are willing to
Yeah.
have that conversation. But women don't realize that those fluctuating hormone levels impact their sleep and their mood and their focus and their concentration, that it's gasoline on their underlying mental health issues, whatever those are, right? If you
Yeah.
have ADHD, it's worse. If you have OCD, it's worse. If you have anxiety, it's worse. The skin changes, the vaginal changes, the urinary changes, the muscle mass, body composition, metabolism, right? Like the list goes on. And this is
Oh yeah.
not about hot flashes.
No.
I think is this like pinnacle symptom we seem to be looking for to decide whether or not women deserve to be treated.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the hot flashes has always been this big, this is like the symptom everyone is looking for, the hot flashes, but that's just one symptom of many symptoms. And to your point, you just named all of them. It is literally head to toe. So that's kind of slower brain and feeling like your skin is changing, and even behind the scenes, lipids rising and other things that are happening, cardiovascular disease, bone changes. We know cognitive decline is something that all of this starts to really kind of kick into higher gear with menopause. And it really is the result of hormonal changes, a lot of it. I mean, obviously, we need to look at the lifestyle pieces as well. That never can be a piece that is left out of the conversation. We do have to, we sometimes, I think, don't recognize that our bodies are not designed to live the way that we've been pushing them to live. So we're sort of pushing ourselves to do something that we're not designed to do. And by midlife, it can often catch up with us, and it catches up with a vengeance. So this is where it's even more important for us to kind of take a pause and really think about, how do we want to feel, and be willing to really, if we weren't before, now it's even more critical that we start to, prioritize ourselves. And yes, our kids are important, and our parents are important, and our significant other is important, our job is important. But if we are not here in good health, everyone around us suffers. So we really have to take this time to start to put ourselves first and say, what do I need? What is my body asking me for?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, we see lots of like media around women in their 40s not putting up with bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And I think like
Yeah.
there is certainly something to be said about that, right? That as women like come into their own, come into themselves, whatever we want to call that they start to recognize the importance of things like boundaries and healthy relationships and to create this like social situation that is prioritizing her needs, right? I think
Yeah.
you can see women, moving towards that and pushing that envelope, especially at
Mhm.
that time of their life. And it's funny because that's like such a metaphor for what their health is actually also asking them to
Mhm.
do, right? To
Mhm.
go to bed a little earlier, to say no to the thing, right? To fuel themselves well, to not do
Mhm.
another diet. Like that's actually what your health is sort of asking you for. So like the nonsense and bullshit you're not willing to put up with from
Yeah.
your life, right? Like we actually need to translate some of that to the way that we start to deal with our health at that time.
Yeah. And that's where I think, whenever I work with patients and clients, and I'm sure you're in that same mindset, we have to talk about sleep and stress and movement and kind of those everyday things. What are you eating? Are you nourishing your body? Not on the mindset, like I'm not at all about the diet mentality, but more about what is going to fuel your body, what feels good in your body. Of course, we're all going to do things that we go off the rail once in a while, or we indulge and do fun, things. It should be all about balance. But I think in general, taking that step back and thinking about, yeah, how are you doing all of those sort of daily things that your body really needs? Because most of us aren't. And that's a really big part of why we're not feeling well. And I think in our 20s, we can do that. We can stay up all night and we can burn the candle at both ends. But at a certain point, it will catch up with us. And in our 40s, when hormones are on the downward decline and, our health in general is, we start to see other things that start to decline. In general, things slow down a little bit as we age. We know that. So we really do need to put that, as that's kind of top priority. And like you said, I mean, our body's asking for it. And I think most of us know what our body's asking for. We just don't want to do it, or we don't want to really pause and take the time out.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I'll say to my patients, like when you're in your 20s, you can eat and sleep today to recover from yesterday.
Yeah.
Right? Like it doesn't matter what you did. You could stay up all night, you could drink, you could do whatever. And then the next day, what did you do? Right? You would like, uh, schlep around the house and recover.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're in your 40s, you actually have to eat and sleep today to prepare for tomorrow.
Hmm.
And most women are in this like chronic like deficit where they're drawing more out of that bank account than they're putting in on any given day.
Yeah.
And that strategy doesn't actually work anymore because we
Hmm.
don't have the same just physiological resiliency to that. And when we do that, our PMS symptoms get worse. Our experience of menopause gets worse when we're like white knuckling it through those 10 years versus supporting ourselves.
Yeah.
Your symptoms are actually worse, right? Which is hard because mean, so much about medicine is reactive, right? And even like the conversation around diet and nutrition is so reactive for the most part. Whereas this is a build, right? Like this is a marathon, but in a good
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
If we can teach women to like slowly support themselves over those 10 years, they're it's such small little changes that they need to make actually. And the
Yeah.
benefits are felt so much greater than we have this like, oh my God, I have hot flashes. What do you got for hot flashes kind of approach, right?
Yeah, and that seems like that's the big thing. And I think, I mean, it's funny on Instagram, that's a lot of the messages when you put content out there related to symptoms. It's like, okay, quick, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And it's like, it's a lot bigger than that. And we can't give medical, true medical advice anyway. But the idea is, yeah, if you just start with the basics, if you sleep a little bit more, yeah, I want to stay up and watch the third episode of Bridgerton too. But we can't. I mean, we just can't do that anymore. And I think part of that's what a lot of us do because we've packed our days and we're doing so much. We've overloaded ourselves with so much. We've put so much on our shoulders. We almost need that nighttime. I find that with a lot of my patients and clients where nighttime is that time where, hey, it's my time, it's me time, but then we end up cutting into sleep and things like that because we want to get that Netflix binge or something else, scroll social media or whatever it is. And I think we don't always realize that these little things, that if we just make small tweaks in those departments, starting with, yeah, getting better sleep and, maybe not loading our day as much as we were and saying no and feeling like we can take some of those liberties that we didn't before can make a huge, huge impact on our health. Absolutely.
Hmm. It's funny. I was putting my daughter to bed this week and she was really teary. And I was like, you know what? This is a signal that you need to go to bed. It doesn't matter what we're
Mhm.
talking about right now. You're going to feel better in the morning, right? We're going to talk about this
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
And as I'm like scratching her back, I'm thinking, hopefully she does this for me in about 8 days. And just tells me to go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. We need someone to do that, don't we? We always need someone that can scratch our back and just tell us it's going to be
8 days
okay.
before
Yeah.
she needs to tell me to go to
Yeah.
bed.
Oh my
So tell
gosh.
me, Jill, like, do you feel like, so this is kind of a big question. Do you feel like the modern woman needs HRT?
I will say I do. I do think the modern woman needs HRT, and I'll tell you why. Because I think if we kind of stand back and think about our lives, and then this is my approach. I think is it right for everyone? It might not be right. There might be circumstances where it's not right for someone. So I don't want to say everybody, blanket statement needs this, like anything in medicine.
For sure.
But I sort of look at it as hormones are needed for every function in the body from head to toe. We know that. If you go back to like the year 1900, the average life expectancy for women was like age 50. Well, the average age for menopause is 51. So a lot of women, you think of today, we live to be, 78. I think now it's even up to 80 is like the average life expectancy for women. So if we think about the average life expectancy is now 30 years longer than it was. And we're going to live those years without hormones. What is that going to look like? And so sometimes I find, women will say, well, it's a natural phase in life and all these things. And so I don't want to use hormones. But I always have to kind of, remind people that we live to be 80 now because of artificial means, because we have heat and we have sanitation and we have food like we didn't have before, manufactured food nonetheless sometimes, but we have food plentiful for most people these days, or nutrients that are plentiful. We have surgeries, we have medicines, people don't die in childbirth like they did. We have antibiotics, all these things that have artificially extended our lives, allowed us to artificially extend our lives to be 80. That's great. But why is there such a pushback with hormones, which we know has this huge benefit in our body? And in a lot of cases, bringing in hormones to optimal levels, and I'm not talking about levels when you're in your 20s, but where they protect bones and they protect the brain and they protect the blood vessels, can really prevent the need for a lot of the medications and surgeries and other things that may come our way, if we don't bring hormones on. So it's really more about how are they going to work in our body, and how having low hormones, I think in a lot of ways really sets us up for chronic disease or chronic disease more quickly.
Yeah. So the first point is nobody wants to go back to their 20s, right? And
Right,
if I
right.
use that example with my patients too, I'm like, we're not giving you so much hormone that you feel like you did when you were 20. We don't want to go back there anyways.
Yeah,
But to your point, like the unnatural thing is living so long.
yeah, it
Right?
is.
When women say, well, it's not natural to take hormones, this is natural, the thing that's happening to me is natural. I'm like, no, it's not natural for you to live until you're in your 70s or 80s.
Yeah,
And so if we start to look at it from that lens, and I like the way you put it, like it's artificial means, it's science, it's medicine that's created this longevity for women, but we haven't backed it up with the support to let those years be well.
yes,
Right?
yes.
Or let her live to her fullest. And maybe 30 years ago or 40 years ago, when we started to see that shift in longevity for women, right? I know my grandma is 90, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her life didn't look like my life,
Yeah,
right? And so for those women, did we notice if they were struggling cognitively? Did
mm-hmm.
she need to do all the things that I'm going to want to do when I'm 50? Did
Mm-hmm.
that woman in those years do those things, right? Or did she train, right, at the gym? Did she do, like, she just didn't do those things, and so her needs
Yeah.
were different.
100%. And that's a great point too, that it's the modern day living where we live so differently, and to live without, to be wanting to do all these things, we have to think about what are we missing when we don't have our hormones. And And it's huge. I mean, if you really look at what hormones do, they're in every cell of the body. So, rather than having to go on, and again, it doesn't mean you won't go on something, but statins or end up with broken bones, or bones that are easily broken, or feeling like you said, like we've talked about brain fog and cognitive issues. We know that hormones offer those protections. And among other things, again, vaginal health. And I think about being in a partnership with somebody, and when vaginal health is not where it needs to be, we all know, intimacy goes out the door. And it's not just about the hormones, because obviously there needs to be other things there in that relationship. But that is a piece of it. If a woman is uncomfortable vaginally, she's not going to want to be intimate with her husband, and that causes relationship issues. So there's other things that are happening, aside from just the cognitive, the bones and the blood vessels. It's that head to toe sort of, kind of assessment that we want to look at and say, yeah, we want to feel well. We want to feel vibrant. We don't want to just be hanging by a thread. We want to feel like our very best selves till the very, very end. And I think hormones allow us to really do that, again, in the right amounts. And we cannot leave food and lifestyle the piece out of it. That's a big one.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think about like what my bigger purpose is, which we were talking about this a little bit off camera too, you know, it's to help women be well, to go out there and do the things I need her to do to change the world, right? I think about the women who are going to run for prime minister and president and going to lead, our future companies towards a more feminine, business-led and leadership kind of future, which is what we know we need, right?
Yeah, right.
That woman needs to be supported.
Yes,
That woman
100%.
cannot show up. And it probably takes her until she's 40 or 50 in her life to get to that point, to lead in the way that we need all of them to lead. I can't have her crying half the month, right? I
Yeah.
can't have her feeling unconfident and not being able to show up in the way that she's like built this empire of whatever her life is. I can't have her not show up.
Yeah.
And so to me, like, I feel like it's a necessary, again, there's like all the medical caveats. Of course, there's people that don't qualify. Of course, there's people that shouldn't have it, da, 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 da. But like in general, when I'm thinking about that prototype woman in her 50s or late 40s, I need her to show up. And there's probably a case for us looking at the impact that hormone decline has on her ability to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like the only hormone replacement that I feel like there's so much pushback on. We don't push back on insulin. We would never deprive a type 1 dependent diabetic of insulin. Like, you need insulin because your body's no longer making it. Thyroid related issues, we replace thyroid hormones. I mean, we're always looking behind the scenes, yes, with that holistic lens of why aren't these things working? Is there something we can do, and try to improve things behind the scenes? But we do provide hormones in other areas without question, because we know that that's when someone needs for their body to run well. Why is there so much pushback on our sex, we consider just our sex hormones? They go far, they really, their benefits are far beyond sex hormone, jobs and benefits. They do so much more. And I think that's where we really need to kind of shift our focus to, is just that head to toe mentality.
Yeah, and not to make it like a feminist issue, but we also don't deprive testosterone.
Yeah,
when
right.
it's also necessary, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you imagine, and so now for listeners, right? And if you've asked or inquired with your practitioner about HRT and they've given you some, things to think about before you consider it, I'm saying that in air quotes.
Yeah.
Like, just replace that word with some other necessary medication and imagine how silly the conversation sounds, right? Like, well, you can take your insulin if you want to.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
absolutely.
I guess you could treat your hypothyroidism if you want, right? It's quality of life, basically.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a practitioner, I mean, as you, because you prescribe, and I'm not a prescribing practitioner, do you find in your sort of circles of colleagues, do you have an understanding of why it seems like there's a lot of fear surrounding hormones in particular?
Yeah.
Um,
To me, I see there's sort of like two camps. There's the like, you can do it if you want to, right? Which makes it feel like it's this, I'm gonna like cosmetic, like non-necessary, luxurious kind of medicine to do, right? That's the one side of it. Like, I guess if you want, it's up to you, versus like us coming at it from the perspective of like, okay, well, you hired me to be on your health team to be part of a long-term health strategy, and this is actually your best option,
Yeah.
right? Which, we're not making that up. That's what the data is. But I see that side. It's like well, I guess if you
Yeah.
want. It's
Yeah.
just quality of life. That's my favorite quote from a healthcare practitioner in the last couple of years. Said to one of my patients, like, I guess if you want to, it's just quality of life. And I was like, isn't that what the
Is
first point is? Like, isn't
of
that what we're
living? Yeah.
here? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then
Yeah.
the
I've
other
heard,
side,
I've heard similar. Yeah. I've definitely heard similar.
the other side is, and so then it makes women feel like they're being selfish for
Yeah.
pursuing it, right? Like, aren't we past that, right? Like, if women want to do things for themselves, like, we're not judging women who do anything for themselves. We're working towards that, right
Yeah.
now. If she views that as self-care, that's
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
even if we do think it's a luxurious side of medicine, so what, right? um,
Right.
but the other side is around the myths about risk, and that we overestimate the risk. We hang our hat on those couple of potential side effects or risks, and that's a really fear-driven way of looking at this topic, right? All drugs have some risk. The risk is higher to not do it in many women.
Yes.
And because we're so reactive, we don't step back and look at that 10-year plan with that woman very often to say the risk of not doing it is greater, right? Instead, we say, well, it might make you bleed.
Yeah. Right.
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 Or, well, it might give you breast tenderness, or, well, it might make you like, we focus on the like first 90 days and not the 10-year picture. And that's propagated so many of the myths that continue to exist now, right? Around breast cancer, which I wish we could just put that one to rest,
Yeah.
and weight gain, right? Which is just straight up not true. And yet it's the most commonly cited reason why women avoid HRT is they think it's going to make them gain weight, which it's actually the opposite, right?
Right.
Um, and that feels like a big beast to overcome, is the myth around HRT, right? I
Yeah.
can convince a woman she's worth it, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
she just needs permission to know she's worth the care. It's the fear that her mom was told, don't do it, right? Her grandmother was told it will kill her. And now here she is feeling lost and isolated and alone and feeling terrible. But there's so much fear ingrained in like well, what happens if I do it, right?
I hear that all the time as well. And I think it's really unfortunate because it is, like you said, everything in medicine is about benefits versus risks. And when you look at the benefits for most women, and there are, again, always caveats, but for most women, the benefits are going to outweigh the risks. And I think it's unfortunate because even practitioners, a lot of the mainstream practitioners have always been sort of taught to prescribe for hot flashes only, prescribe to help that woman maybe get better sleep. And then when that ends, then, stop the hormones. But really, we know that hormones confer such huge benefits in the body that it's more about that long-term strategy. And I think for some women too, when there is that transition, there are some women who will say, I don't feel it as deeply as maybe another woman would. But I think still even educating that woman about HRT, just understanding, because there's a point where when hormones finally hit that point where they're low, you will feel it. And so that's where I think understanding the data or looking at lipids and understanding what happens with bone health and really educating all women so that they understand, because sometimes you'll find women will say, it was 5 years later and I really felt it. Now I want it. Now my doctor won't give it to me. So it's this, it's just really helping women to understand, how hormones will decline. It is going to be gradual. And so you can start to build that strategy going into it with perimenopause, in the perimenopausal years, or even prior to. But I think it becomes not so much of a priority for a lot of women until they really start to feel those symptoms. All of a sudden the symptoms, the sleep, especially the sleep is the big one that I find is probably one of the first symptoms. And some of that anxiety, those are the two, especially with that progesterone dropping, that you see women saying, gosh, I don't know, I just don't sleep well anymore. And gosh, I'm so much more anxious than I used to be. And it's sort of that red flag of, hold on a second, let's start to look at hormones, because you are in your late 30s, early 40s, and this is happening. So let's start to kind of dive in right now and educate a woman about it so that she can understand that this is part of that process.
And I think you bring up a good point, like even just tracking those symptoms. And I think I mentioned tracking your symptoms in every single podcast episode. So,
I love
um,
that. I love that. That's
but
huge. Yeah.
it's huge because, again, it's not that your ovaries like sail off into the sunset, right? It is
Right.
a rocky road in those last 10 or 12 years. And
Mm-hmm.
what's happening is that your frequency of ovulation is going down, right? So in your 20s, you may ovulate every single month, no questions asked. In your 30s, again, might ovulate every single month, no questions asked. And after your 40s, like your frequency of ovulation is declining. You might still bleed, right?
Yeah.
And so bleeding episodes, and that's what I have started calling it for patients, because calling it a period makes it sound like you did all the things you were supposed to do hormonally, right?
I
Where
like
that's
that.
not
I might have to
always
snag
true.
that. Yeah.
It's not always true. It was a bleeding
Yeah.
episode. It
Yeah.
wasn't a full cycle,
Yeah.
because it helps women understand, well, I still have my period,
Yeah.
right? But your period is not a requisite for making hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can have gaps in production. You can have an anovulatory cycle, but still bleed.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a low progesterone amplitude where you make a little, but not enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you still have a bleeding episode. Do we call that like an awesome production of sex hormones and call it a full period? I don't know, right?
Yeah. Right.
I'm putting that word in there. And so, but it's haphazard, right? Like
Yeah.
at best, the hormone production. So you might, sitting there as a listener, go like, well, I felt really lousy for, September, October, November, but now I feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that almost makes you feel crazy, right? It's like your
Yeah.
body gaslighting you. Like you don't,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
start to question your own
Yeah.
reality.
Right. Exactly.
But when you've tracked it, you can start to see the frequency that this is happening. And you can start to be really in tune with, hey, in a month where my cycle is only 21 days, this is what I notice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if my cycle is like 33 days, I have hot flashes the 5 days before my period, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. But because women haven't been taught to look at their hormones beyond their fertility, they may not even be tracking how long their cycle is.
I think that's a great point. I think there is I think a lot of women are really on board with tracking when they're trying to get pregnant, but when that's over and they're done, that's not something that's a priority. And I would say most of the women that I've worked with have left that be like that has been something that's been long gone, where if you really start to look, it's such a huge indicator. It just helps you so much to really connect the dots between those symptoms and what's happening in your body. And then, again, going back to, if you feel off, yourself. So if you feel off, there's something there. Trust yourself. And women are very intuitive. So we have to trust ourselves that if something feels off and that first doctor is not acknowledging it, or that first practitioner isn't, unfortunately, sometimes you do have to keep going until you find the one that will. But I think, no matter what, hormones should always be a part of the conversation throughout our life, not just when we're trying to get pregnant, not just when we're, even in menopause, but all of the years in between. We really need to always be talking about hormones and including hormones in the conversation, and as part of our wellness strategy, and as part of even our checkup with our doctors. Like, let's check hormones, let's see where they're at, what's going on, especially when we've got symptoms.
I'm so grateful for this conversation, Jill. I'd love if you could kind of finish us off by giving me I always ask my guests to what's your soapbox message, passion project for women? Why are you here?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and also where we can find you, because I just love your content. I feel like it's really relatable. It contextualizes this stage of life for women so well, and gives hope that there are things that can be done. This is not something that's just going to mow you over. But what's your big message for women? Like, what do you want women to know?
Yeah, I think, my big message is that we can feel awesome through midlife and beyond. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some participation on our part. But I think I really want women to step away from the message that midlife equals decline and aging equals decline, and really start to really flip that narrative and understand that if we pay attention to our body and we nourish our body and we listen to our body and we build a healthcare team that is in the know and is supportive and understands us and is willing to work with us, we can feel awesome, truly awesome and amazing until our very last breath. There's no reason for us to decline.
I love it. I feel like that's, we're so in tune as far as what we want women to know.
Yeah.
Like there are certain things in practice that make me teary in a initial patient visit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is women having had a hysterectomy.
Oh.
There is nothing that gets me more like in my soul than a woman who's had a hysterectomy, because by the time I see her, she has had the figurative like hormonal carpet ripped out from underneath her.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets me like so deeply that this woman feels so different, so alone. And that's a very exaggerated version of what all of our women are going through. And so like on some level, like it just makes me so emotional that this is what happens and that we are supposed to just sit there and kind of take it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I so appreciate us being able to have this conversation and letting women in on the secret that this is not the way it has to be, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
don't have to take menopause lying down in a puddle of sweat.
I know. Well, I'm so grateful that you had me on your podcast, and I'm really looking forward to connecting with you more and seeing you on Instagram.
Yeah, so
So
where do we
thank
find
you.
you, Jill? Let's just
Yeah.
remind the listeners of your handle. We'll put it in the show notes so it's an easy click, but can you just let us know how to contact you?
Yeah, super easy. So I'm on Instagram at Jill. I know it's a long one. It's at Jill.Shimaleski. That's my handle on Instagram. I have a website. It's my name again, www.jillshimaleski.com. You can find me in both places. Most of my information is really related to perimenopause and menopause. So lots of resources, lots of hormone tips, lots of hormone checklists and things like that. So yeah, stop by. I'd love to see you.
Awesome. We'll put all of those links in the show notes, and follow Jill on Instagram for sure. That's how her and I became connected
Yeah.
in the first place. And I just love your content there. Thanks so much, Jill.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. It's my absolute passion to bring women quality and science-informed information about their health so that they can make empowered, good decisions about their health care. I'd like to invite you to join me in my Facebook community, Women's Health Unplugged. There we share live videos, blog posts, and behind-the-scenes information about the podcast, where you can connect with me and other women who are interested in their health care. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/WH Unplugged. We'll see you there.